What's up, guys? I thought I would do another one of these question answering things before I finish up my homework. Trying to be productive while I procrastinate. So the first thing I had to ask was answer in the comments whether you guys would like me to document my training in any capacity on YouTube, whether that's like one a week, one with commentary, one without commentary. Anyway, I don't really know how YouTube works, so any way you guys think might be appropriate. If you see someone answer a way that you would like, just give it a thumbs up so I know which ones are popular and aren't popular. And if you don't want to see my training logged on YouTube because you already follow me on Instagram, where I have posted my main sets for about 4 years every single training day, let me know in the comments. I'm not offended in the slightest. Usually people care about Max's training a little bit more than they do mine, and it doesn't bother me any. So yeah, just let me know how that would look. And then also, as always, if you have any questions you would like my opinion on, put them in the comments of this video and I will answer them in the next one. So the first question was, how do I fix wrists rolling back on the bench? Despite using a bulldog grip, the bar slips to the top of my hands. Also Trump or Biden. Well, that has nothing to do with anything. But as far as the bar rolling back, basically, in my opinion, the first thing you do is when you're setting up, he says specifically when he goes heavier. So kind of start to finish. When you're setting up, you want to set that bar nice and low in your hand so it's over your wrist joint, so you're not bleeding power by having it, suspended, not over your wrist. How I do that is I point all of my fingers and my thumb up towards the ceilings, and I push my hand into the bar using the weight on the bar to stop it from coming up, but it settles into a lower spot in my hand. From there, I then take my fingers, I clamp them around, and I squeeze the bar as hard as I possibly can. And the cue I go with is try to leave fingerprints in the bar, right? But you want to reinforce that good position, not just grab the bar and squeeze. And if you find your wrists are rolling and you're cueing both of these things, maybe there is a strength issue there and you should do more of your pressing without wrist wraps if that is something you do. If it's not, I don't know how necessary direct forearm training is, but the wrist roller forward and back can be somewhat helpful. But also just being really, really deliberate with cueing, squeezing the bar as hard as you can, even with weights that you don't need to squeeze the bar as hard as you can. Sometimes you have a cue that feels great at lighter weights, you get to heavier weights and it doesn't seem to make a difference, but the problem is that you haven't been doing the cue for long enough and strengthening the musculature associated with the cue. So the analogy I always use, if you have someone whose knees are collapsing and I say spread the floor, right, that might help in the 50% range, but when it gets heavier their knees knock in and there's some sort of strengthening there. But if they spread the floor as hard as they can on every squat they perform for the remainder of a training block, maybe they'll be able to get up to 75% without their knees coming in. So you have to apply the cue for an extended amount of time to see its benefit. So I think this would fall into that category, is you want to cue squeezing the bar as hard as you can on every set you perform, including the really light ones, for a while and see if that has an effect on your issue. When you first started lifting, did you have good form? No, I did not. Or did you lift with bad form on the squat, bench, and deadlift, thinking it was good at that time? I don't know if I thought it was good, to be honest. I just wanted to get strong, so I was pushing the numbers a little bit harder than I should. I probably thought it was less bad than it was, though. If you did have bad form, do you think it caused any harm to your body, such as joints or any injuries? As far as lasting damage, no, absolutely not. I tweaked my back every now and then. Wasn't the worst thing in the world, just trained through it. But as far as lasting damage, no. I think a lot of people get really in their heads about this, and I think they kind of like nocebo themselves. They tell themselves that they did some permanent damage from early in their lifting career, when, if you want to get into, the weeds of it, you can go look at all the barbell medicine guys stuff about how there's a psychophysiological model of pain, and sometimes there isn't physiologically anything wrong, and the reason you're experiencing pain is because you expect to experience pain or you're managing your fatigue badly. All this being said, is there's a good chance you don't have to be in pain from these perceived permanent damages you've done to your body early in training, and I think that people hold themselves back by concluding that without very much evidence. The other thing is they'll go like, oh, I went to a doctor and I got imaging, and it's bone on bone. Well, okay, well, of people over 40, 50% of people show evidence of bone-on-bone contact without any symptoms. So is that automatically a life sentence to pain? No. Is it automatically an impairment on your performance? Also no. So I also wouldn't necessarily always take a imaging result that you might have and take that as a conclusion of a lifetime of pain for your training. Kind of unrelated to your question, just kind of wanted to put that out there. Yeah, no, I had shit form. It was only recently that I really feel that I put in the amount of work necessary to get to the level I need to be technique-wise. Still got work to do, but big breakthroughs in my opinion. Does belt placement on the torso have an ideal area, or just whatever feels comfortable? I'm a pretty tall guy with a short torso, and it bruises my hip bone all the time. Okay, well, don't put it on your hip bone. That's probably wrong. No, there isn't an ideal one. It's largely personal preference. You'll see a wide variety of like big fat guys who put it all the way below their gut. You'll see people who put it dead center, and you'll see some people who put it all the way up on the ribs, right below their pec line, like Sebastian or Eric Lillibridge. Largely, it is personal preference and what you feel you're benefiting the most from. You know, there's a rationale to be said that, oh, the up high one, if you're someone who you really feel like the belt is interfering with your positioning on the deadlift, the high belt position might be a way to get something out of it without also getting the negatives of it messing with your positioning. But past that, it's just trial and error for what you feel benefits you the most and doesn't interfere with your bracing mechanics. That's a big caveat. If it's going to interfere with your bracing mechanics, no matter what, just fucking take it off. What is an effective amount of time to jump rope for cardio? How many minutes a session? How many sessions a week? It depends on how good a shape you want to be in. If you want to be in really good shape, a lot. If you want to be in good enough shape to lift weights, a little. For context, the person asking this weighs 135 pounds, so it's going to be a lot longer for you than it will be for me. That's too open-ended of a question to give a decisive answer for. If you just want to get in as good a shape as you can without interfering with your training, I would just trial and error and find what's too much and sit just a little bit below that. So next one is, so I'm currently training 3 times a week with 4 rest days. Currently, I train on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The other days being rest days. I am 5'4", 163 pounds, a beginner to powerlifting, and I am not strong. Currently, the goal is to maintain body weight and get stronger. I eat about 2,000 to 2,200 calories per day, but would lowering carbs on non-training days be beneficial to me? How should I go about this if so? Okay, so I was going to yell at you to gain weight because 163 pounds is pretty skinny, but I noticed you're 5'4", so it's not abysmal leverages. I'm a big believer in leverages. I think you need to fill out your leverages. You have to get to a certain height to body weight ratio to really do the best lifting you're capable of. But that being said, that's not abysmal leverages, so I'm not going to yell at you. But that being said, I would urge you to have periods of time in a surplus and periods of time in a deficit in your program, right? So when you're a beginner, as you mentioned you are, one of the absolute best things you can do for yourself is just prioritize putting on muscle mass. All of your body, doing some bodybuilding, eating like a bodybuilder. Early in your training career, the required specificity to get better is low. That means you can spend a certain amount of time getting better at the main lifts, refining your technique, getting stronger on them, and you can spend a reasonable amount of your recovery dedicated to pure hypertrophy work, which is going to pay dividends down the line as that required specificity goes up. And your body puts on muscle mass a little bit better in a caloric surplus than it does at maintenance. So I would still urge you to try to have bulking and cutting phases to some capacity. But if you are insistent on maintaining body weight, what we want to do is we want to gain muscle mass and lose fat, which everybody does. Just a little harder said than done. Could carb cycling help you with that? And in like an isocaloric diet, so you're on average in a week, you're eating what you burn. Yes, possibly. I think that's something you could play around with. You could just kind of go into a spreadsheet, play around with it, move some carbs from your non-training days to your training days. Because you're moving carbs and keeping your fats and your proteins about the same, your calories will fall on your non-training days and go up on your training days. That's to be expected, and you just want to make sure the weekly average remains in that 2,000 to 2,200 range. Then it will still be an isocaloric diet, and you can just kind of see how many carbs can I move to my training days, and does it benefit my performance? How low can I go on my carbs on my non-training days before I feel like it's impairing my recovery or it's just no fun to eat? It's worth some trial and error. Could it possibly drive some extra body composition change? Maybe. Worth a try. You don't want to go too crazy with it because you don't want to burn yourself out mentally. Because the most important thing, the best diet, is the one you're going to follow. So if you're chasing some hypothetical optimal but you really don't enjoy it, more than likely, unless you have a steel will, you're going to quit eventually. I hope that helps, man. Do you ever see programs that people run that made no sense but saw someone make progress nicely? I was wondering because I've been told that a lot. By the way, no bro split in case you were wondering. Yeah, no, I've seen some really, really dumb programs that people made some great progress on. Usually when you're a beginner, intermediate level, wherever the hell you want to define that, you can make progress doing the stupidest shit of all time as long as you're trying hard. You can make progress not even trying hard for a while, but especially you can make crazy rates of progress if you're just applying yourself, which I think a lot of people fail to do, especially if they don't come from like a sports background. And just like physically pushing yourself isn't something that they're super familiar with. They think they're like, I'm trying as hard as a human can try, but if you didn't run a bunch of gassers growing up, you don't know how far you can push your body. That being said, as you get more advanced, eventually you get to the point where intelligent programming eventually it does become necessary to make progress, but that's a lot further down the line than people think. You can achieve a pretty reasonable level of strength just doing stupid shit if you try really hard. Yeah, and just, you know, do the outside the gym stuff and you try really hard, you can make it really far. You know, maybe your risk of injury might be a little higher, but you can go quite far like that. Just watch the Perry Nutrition workout video. I've heard you say you like to have 2 meals prior to training in one of your question videos. That is true. Do both of these meals contain around the same amount of carbs, or the second meal that is closer in time have a bit more carbohydrates? And does your post-workout meal also... Okay, so this is something that might vary for other people from what it does for me. I'll be totally honest. Carbs are the exact same in all 3. Mostly because it's easy and I could just divide up my big old rice cooker into six things, right? I have 6 meals. I have 6 equal portions of carbs. There's some extra carbs that go into my peri-workout ones because I have fruit with my peri-workout meals. But I would say that in the grand scheme of things, that's pretty negligible. The reason I can do this is because I've got a very high metabolic rate, right? That means I have a lot of carbs at my disposal with how I structure my diet, right? A shit ton, and so much that I can just kind of put them everywhere. If I was working on a little bit more limited carbohydrates, whether I was cutting or just someone with a little bit lower metabolism, I absolutely would take away from that first meal. Maybe I would even move some of the fats from my pre-workout meal to that one before it, and then move some of the carbs from that first meal to the second meal. Was probably what I would do. I personally don't really have any problems with eating fat or large meals prior to training. I don't feel nauseous. I feel great. So I don't really reduce my fat all that much in my pre-workout meal, but for a lot of people, moving it to that first meal of the day can make a big difference for how you feel while you train. And yeah, I would say, so that's my answer for myself. But for other people, that's certainly something I would look into, and I would definitely maybe move some extra carbs into that post-workout meal as well, because debatably speaking, in this post-workout window, you have like a hypersensitivity to using carbohydrates to refill your intramuscular glycogen stores. I've seen this argued a little bit. Can't say I know definitively, but I've been told it enough times by people smarter than me that I'm willing to eat a little bit of extra carbs right after training, try to avoid some fats. I hope that answers the question. It's one of those things that I think maybe my answer is specific enough to me that it might not be what I would tell other people to do, though. Optimal time for eating before working out. Okay, so that's largely personal preference. It can be anywhere from like 2 hours if you're someone who had, like, if your schedule worked out in a way that you needed to eat a big meal, especially a big meal that has fats in it. It might even be like an hour and a half to 2 hours. If you're eating a small meal, you might be able to get away with a lot less time than that, especially if it's a small meal with low fat, easy digesting carbohydrate source. You might even just be able to eat it like 15 minutes out. But past that, it's largely personal preference. If you're doing training that is really aerobically challenging, usually you want to put it a little bit further away, otherwise you're going to feel nauseous. If you're doing something where you're lying down like a bench press, you could probably get away with a little bit less time. But all those things factored in, it's just personal preference. I personally can eat a massive meal and just go straight to the gym. I don't really have any problems with it, but I also am not exactly doing like CrossFit or something. So I think it does vary. But as far as physiological I would not really worry about it. Two big meals today or 3 smaller meals. I'm going to go with the 3 smaller meals for sure. Usually a higher meal frequency and breaking it up into some more smaller meals is better. It's better for digestion. Usually it's going to mean you're going to get more protein down. And third is, it's kind of been shown in some literature that breaking up your protein into as many feeding windows as possible is good for maximizing hypertrophy. So more feeding windows rather than less. Do you think that eating a meal before bed would affect the quality of sleep if you have to digest it? Maybe even a casein protein shake. Was wondering because if you've experimented this, because you're pretty serious with eating stuff. Okay, yeah. So I wouldn't worry too much, right? Digestion is a parasympathetic function. For those that don't know, sympathetic is your fight or flight. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. Those two things are like neurologically paired. So in that regard, it's not bad. I know that some people attest that eating a high-fat meal before they go to bed upsets their stomach to a degree that it interferes with their sleep. So in that case, it's bad. And I know some people that say if they eat a high-fat meal before they go to bed, they sleep like a baby. So largely just experimentation there. So I've heard the same thing about carbohydrates. I've heard some people say that eating a carbohydrate-heavy meal before bed ruins their sleep, and I've heard other people say that it knocks them out, right? So that's largely personal preference. The casein protein shake, I understand exactly where you're coming from there. You're looking a little bit slower digesting protein. You want like basically a delayed protein release as you sleep, so it's not just this giant proteinless fasting window. That makes sense. You're looking at like a 1% at best improvement in hypertrophic response to training. So, if it's just something you like to do, go for it, but don't think it's making a tremendous difference. Yeah, I've experimented a lot with it myself, and I certainly have to, not that there's any science to back this. I'm not telling you to do it because there is no science to back it. I find if I have sugar before I go to sleep, my sleep is awful. Am I placeboing myself? Who fucking knows? Maybe. I don't really think about it, and then it fucks me, and I have to retroactively think back and think what I did that is making my sleep even worse than it already is. So I would say it's largely personal preference. Definitely something just trial and error for yourself. The next one was, thanks, man. I appreciate the response. You're welcome. Would you ever consider getting a coach? I sense a lot of high-level coaches still have coaches themselves. No. I am neurotic enough that I just don't feel like I would be comfortable handing my training over to someone else, at least in the way that I am now. And writing the program that I do is part of what I enjoy. And I do this for my own enjoyment, so I'm going to do it in the way that I enjoy the most. I tend to enjoy the process of figuring out what I need to do, doing some problem solving, just as much as I enjoy the process of actually doing it. So, not really on the radar. Down the line, if I'm on the verge of a very, very high competitive level and I can't figure it out myself, I'll be quite upset, but maybe I would consider it. And then the last one was, that answered my question perfectly. Thank you so much. You are welcome, Jared. Do you think a person should squat with a bar placement that feels the most correct to them, even if it's not the position where they're strongest? No, I don't think that's how you should base it. Oftentimes, all correct feeling is just familiarity. So you might have been squatting in this wrong way or suboptimal way, and someone fixes it and you're like, that feels worse. Well, yeah, it's just because you're not as familiar. One thing I might distinguish between is there's a squat that might be optimal for building the musculature we're looking for. So let's just take a high bar as an example. And then there's a different squat that's the best for displaying within a competition, right? Usually going to be a low bar. So kind of delving into your question just slightly more, you said the bar placement that feels the most correct. The feeling, the one where you're strongest is probably the one that you're going to use in competition. Obviously, the goal is to lift as much weight as you can to competition standard. So the bar position where you're the strongest is the one where you're strongest. But you might have an alternative bar position that you find builds the qualities that you're looking for a little bit better, whether it be an SSB, a mid bar, a high bar, some other specialty bar, a front squat. Maybe it builds the qualities that you're looking for in a hypertrophy block. Maybe even it builds the qualities you're looking for in a strength block a little bit better than the low bar. And then the low bar is really just how you display your strength. That would be okay, but I really wouldn't base it off of just feel. You need a lot more well thought out rationale than that, in my opinion.